She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. A teenage girl, alone, terrified, pressed her back against the cold brick wall of a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon. Her eyes were darting left and right like a cornered animal. Tears were streaming silently down her face. She was trying not to be seen. And then a massive Harley-Davidson roared into the parking lot. The biker killed the engine, swung his leg off the bike. 6'2", leather jacket, tattoos crawling up his neck. A man who looked like he had lived 10 challenging lives and survived every single one. He saw the girl. She saw him. And without a single word, she ran straight to him and hid behind his back. 3 seconds later, a black SUV screeched into the parking lot, and everything exploded. Marcus Raven Cole had not asked for this day. He had woken up at 5 in the morning, same as always, made his black coffee, fed his old dog, a half-blind golden retriever named Biscuit, and pulled on his leather jacket before the sun had even finished rising over the flat Texas highway. He had one plan for the day: ride 300 miles to Lubbock to visit his younger brother, Daniel, who had just gotten out of the hospital after a back surgery. That was it. That was the whole day. Marcus was 41 years old. He had spent 12 years in the military before a roadside bomb in Afghanistan had ended that chapter of his life. He came home quieter than he had left, harder in some places, softer in others. He started riding motorcycles because the road was the only place his mind went completely still. No memories, no guilt, no noise, just wind, asphalt, and the sound of the engine beneath him. He was not a man who looked for trouble, but trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him. He pulled into the Circle K gas station on Route 84 just outside of Abilene because the tank was getting low and his stomach was growling. He was thinking about a hot dog, a terrible gas station dog, and maybe a large coffee with too much sugar. He was thinking about absolutely nothing important. He swung off the Harley, stretched his back, and reached for the gas pump. That is when he saw her. She was standing at the far corner of the gas station building, half hidden behind a trash can, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. She looked about 16 or 17, dark curly hair, a yellow hoodie that was far too thin for the cold wind blowing across the plains. She had no bag, no phone in her hand, no car nearby, nothing. However, it was her eyes that left Marcus speechless. He had seen that look before. Not in a movie, not in a book, in real life. In the eyes of people who had been through something that broke a piece of them. That hollow, glassy, terrified look meant one specific thing. She was not waiting for a ride. She was hiding. Marcus did not walk toward her right away. He had learned, both in the military and in life, that approaching a frightened person too fast could make everything worse. He started pumping his gas slowly, calmly, like he had not noticed her. But he kept her in his line of sight. She was watching the road. Every time a car slowed near the entrance of the gas station, her whole body went rigid. Her breath came faster. Then the car would pass, and she would deflate again, just slightly. Marcus replaced the gas cap. He turned toward the store entrance. And then, as casually as he could manage for a man who looked like a walking warning sign, he changed direction and walked toward her, not directly, at an angle, slow and easy, hands visible, head slightly down. He stopped about 8 feet away. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, but he kept it gentle. She stared at him. Her chin was trembling. "I'm not going to bother you," he said. "I just want to know if you're okay." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You need help?" he asked. And that broke something open in her. Her face crumpled. She shook her head, not meaning no, but meaning everything was wrong. Everything was terribly, horribly wrong. "Okay," Marcus said. He did not move any closer. "Okay, I'm right here. Take your time." She pressed herself back against the wall and looked at the road again. That is when Marcus heard it, the distant sound of an engine, coming fast. Her name was Sophia Reyes. She was 17 years old. She was a straight-A student at Jefferson High School in a small town called Merkel, 30 miles back down the road. She played violin in the school orchestra. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays. She wanted to be a pediatric nurse when she grew up because when she was 7 years old, a kind nurse with red hair had held her hand through a scary surgery, and Sophia had never forgotten that. She was a good girl, a careful girl, a girl who followed the rules and stayed out of trouble, but trouble had come for her anyway. It had started 6 months ago when her mother, Linda Reyes, began dating a man named Gary Hollis. Gary seemed fine at first. He brought flowers. He fixed things around the house. He told Sophia she was a smart kid and asked about her grades with what looked like genuine interest. Her mother was happy for the first time in years, and Sophia wanted so badly to let that be enough. But Gary had a temper that lived underneath the surface like something dark in deep water. You could not see it until suddenly you could see nothing else. It started small. A sharp word when dinner was too cold. A hand slammed on the counter, which made the whole kitchen shake. A look thrown in Sophia's direction that made her feel like a bug under glass. Then, 2 months ago, it stopped being small. Sophia had come home from school to find her mother crying quietly in the bathroom, the door half closed, a purple bruise climbing the side of her jaw. She had called the police that night from her bedroom, her voice barely above a whisper. Gary was arrested, released the next morning. He had looked at Sophia across the kitchen table with those flat gray eyes of his and said very quietly, "You should not have done that." Her mother had begged her not to worsen it. Having taken Gary's side in a way that broke Sophia's heart into pieces, she was still trying to find it. Linda was afraid. Sophia understood the truth in her mind, even when her heart could not forgive it. The situation at home became a war she was not equipped to fight. She tried to stay at school late. She tried to spend time at her friend Camilla's house. She tried to stay invisible in her own home. But that Tuesday morning, everything changed. She had overheard Gary on the phone in the garage. The door was cracked, and she had only meant to pass by, but his voice stopped her. He was talking to someone about money, about a deal. The story is about a man named Deshawn who owed him money and was not going to get away with it. And then he said something that froze Sophia completely in the doorway. He said, "She saw the whole thing. She's a problem." Sophia did not know exactly what she had stumbled into, but she knew enough. She had heard enough. And when Gary turned and saw her standing there in the doorway, the look on his face was not anger. It was something colder than that. She had run. Out the front door, down the road, 3 miles on foot before her legs gave out at the edge of Route 84. She stuck out her thumb, and a kind older woman named Patrice had driven her 20 minutes down the highway before Sophia had said she needed to stop at the gas station. Patrice had offered to call the police. Sophia had panicked and said no. Gary knew people on the local force and had said so more than once, and she did not know who to trust. She had said she was fine, she just needed a minute. Patrice had left, and Sophia had stood at that gas station for 40 minutes, watching the road, waiting for a black SUV she was terrified to see. And then she saw the biker. She had been afraid of him at first, obviously. A huge tattooed man on a roaring motorcycle was not what a 17-year-old girl in a yellow hoodie would normally feel safe approaching. But she watched him for a moment, watched the way he moved, calm, unhurried, watched the way he spoke to her, soft, with space, without pressure. She had seen dangerous men. She knew what they looked like. This was not that. When she heard the engine in the distance, that specific engine, the loud, aggressive growl of Gary's black Chevy Tahoe, something in her body decided before her brain could catch up. She ran to Marcus. She pressed herself against his back, and the SUV came screaming into the parking lot. The black Tahoe skidded to a stop 10 feet away. Gary Hollis stepped out. He was a thick man, 45 years old, with short gray hair and the kind of face that had once been handsome but had curdled into something harder over the years. He was wearing a Carhartt jacket and work boots, and he had his hands loose at his sides in a way that suggested he was very comfortable with confrontation. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. "Step aside," Gary said. His voice was almost pleasant. "The girl's my stepdaughter. This is a family matter." Marcus did not move a single inch. "She doesn't seem to want to go with you," Marcus said. "I doubt that's your business." "She made it my business," Marcus said. "About 30 seconds ago." Gary's jaw tightened. He took one step forward. "I'm not going to ask again." "No," Marcus said. "You're not." Something shifted in the air. The two men stood looking at each other across 10 feet of cracked asphalt while the Texas wind scraped between them. Sophia's hands were gripping the back of Marcus's jacket so hard her knuckles were white. Then Gary looked past Marcus at Sophia, and his voice dropped lower, more personal. "Sophia, sweetheart, come on now. Your mother is deeply concerned. Let's just go home and talk about this." Sophia pressed closer to Marcus. She did not speak. "She's not going anywhere. She doesn't want to go," Marcus said. "And who the hell are you?" Gary snapped, the pleasantness finally cracking. "You think you can just... You don't know anything about my family. You don't know what she did. You don't know..." "I know she's scared," Marcus said. "I know she ran from you. I know she's shaking. That's enough for me." Gary pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," Marcus said, and he meant it completely. That stopped Gary, just for a second. The phone hesitated in his hand. That hesitation told Marcus everything he needed to know. A man with nothing to hide calls the police without thinking twice. A man who says, "Please do," and means it is a man who is not afraid of what the police will find. Gary was afraid. But Gary was also desperate, which made him dangerous. He stepped forward again. "Get out of my way." "No," Marcus said simply. Gary moved to go around him. Marcus moved with him, keeping himself between Gary and Sophia like a wall. Gary tried the other side. Marcus shifted again. It was almost slow, almost choreographed, and Marcus kept his hands completely visible and his voice entirely level. "I don't want to fight you," Marcus said. "I want you to make the right choice here." "The right choice," Gary repeated and laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. He had something in his expression now that Marcus recognized. The look of a man who had just decided. He lunged. What happened next lasted maybe 20 seconds. Gary went for Marcus hard and fast, clearly expecting a big man who moved slowly. He was mistaken about that. Marcus moved like someone who had been trained not just to fight but to control, to protect rather than destroy. He caught Gary's arm, redirected his weight, and put him face down on the asphalt in one smooth motion before Gary even knew what was happening. He had one of Gary's arms pinned behind his back, his knee in the center of Gary's shoulders, and his breathing was still almost completely steady. "Don't," Marcus said quietly. "Just stop." Gary was cursing and struggling, and then, slowly, he went still. Sophia had backed up against the gas pump. She had both hands pressed over her mouth. She was trembling, but she was watching. A gas station attendant, a young man named Jerome, barely 20 years old, had burst out of the store at the sound of the commotion. He saw the situation in about 1 second and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911, Jerome said. "Please," Marcus said. Sophia found her voice. It came out small and cracked, but it was still completed. "Call them," she said. "Please call them. He hurts my mom. He was talking on the phone this morning about something. I don't know what, but it scared me. Please." Jerome was already on the line. Gary had gone completely still under Marcus's hold, but his voice was still moving, low and venomous. "You are making such a mistake," he said. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in." "Probably," Marcus said. "But here we are." 4 minutes. It took 4 minutes for the first state trooper to arrive. A car must have been close. Then a second. Then, 6 minutes after that, 2 more vehicles arrived, and one of them was not a police car. It was an unmarked dark blue sedan, and the 2 people who stepped out of it were wearing federal badges. It turned out, and this came out slowly over the next several hours, that Gary Hollis was not simply an abusive man with a temper. He was a man who had been laundering money through a construction business for a criminal organization based out of Dallas. The DEA had been building a case against him for 8 months. 6 weeks earlier, Sophia's phone call to the police had triggered an already open file. The investigators had been watching Gary carefully, and Sophia, without knowing it, overheard a conversation that morning. That was the final piece they needed. A conversation about a man named Deshawn, who was actually an undercover federal agent whom Gary had begun to suspect. A conversation that, if completed, would have put a federal agent in danger. Sophia had not understood what she stumbled into, but she had run, and she had hidden behind a biker at a gas station on Route 84. And somehow, most ordinarily and extraordinarily, that small, frightened act had changed everything. They sat Sophia down inside the gas station on a folding chair that Jerome brought out from the back. Someone wrapped a thin emergency blanket around her shoulders. A female trooper named Officer Diana Walsh sat beside her, young, warm-eyed, and patient, and let Sophia talk at her own pace. Sophia talked for a long time. She talked about her mother. She talked about Gary. She talked about the bruise on her mother's jaw and the look in Gary's eyes at the kitchen table. She talked about the phone call in the garage. She cried twice and kept going both times. Officer Walsh held her hand. She did not rush her. She did not tell Sophia she was brave, which Sophia hated when adults said it, because it always felt like it was supposed to make the bad thing feel better when it just didn't. She just listened. Marcus stood outside near his motorcycle, talking to a federal agent named Torres, a calm, efficient woman with close-cropped hair and very direct eyes. He answered every question simply and honestly. He had not planned any of these events. He had stopped for gas and a hot dog. Yes, really. He explained what he had seen, what he had done. Why? Agent Torres listened, wrote things down, and finally looked up at him. "You could have just called it in," she said. Not accusing, just observing. "She needed someone there," Marcus said. "Not in 10 minutes, right then." Torres nodded once and closed her notepad. Inside, Sophia asked Officer Walsh the question that had been sitting in her chest like a stone since the moment the investigation all began. "Is my mom okay?" Walsh radioed in. There was a pause, a long, awful one, and then confirmation came back. 2 officers had gone to the Reyes house in Merkel. Linda Reyes was there. She was unharmed. This was the part that made Sophia press the blanket against her face and cry for the 3rd time. She was asking where Sophia was. She had been asking since this morning. She had been out of her mind with worry. "She wants to come," Walsh said gently. "Is that okay? Do you want to see her?" Sophia nodded. She could not speak. The next 40 minutes were the longest of her life. And then the door of the gas station opened, and Linda Reyes walked in, a small dark-haired woman who looked like an older version of Sophia, except around the eyes, where she looked much more tired. And the moment she saw her daughter, she made a sound that was not quite a word. Sophia stood up. The emergency blanket fell to the floor. They held each other for a very long time. Marcus watched through the window. He did not mean to. He had been about to get on his motorcycle and go. He was already late to see Daniel, and his hot dog plans had thoroughly collapsed. But he saw the mother and daughter through the glass, and he stood still and let himself look for just a moment. Jerome came and stood next to him. "That was something else," the young man said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "You were just stopping for gas?" "I was stopping for gas." Jerome shook his head. "Man." Before Marcus could leave, Sophia came outside. She had the emergency blanket still around her shoulders, and her eyes were red, but something in her face had shifted. Some of the terror had moved aside and made room for something else. She walked up to Marcus and stopped a few feet away. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You did the hard part," he said. "You ran. You didn't freeze. You kept yourself safe." She shook her head. "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave," he said. "It just means you're human." She looked at him for a moment. Her chin was steady now. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You didn't know me. You didn't know what was going on. You could have just driven away and called someone." Marcus was quiet for a second. He looked out at the highway where the wind was bending the dry grass along the shoulder of the road. "I have a younger sister," he said. "She's 38 now, lives in Houston with 3 kids and a husband who coaches Little League." He paused. "When she was about your age, she needed help once. In a parking lot, not too different from this one. And someone helped her, a stranger. Just stood between her and a bad situation until it passed." Sophia waited. "I never found out who that was," Marcus said. "Never got to say thank you, but I think about it occasionally, about how one person just standing there can change the whole story." Sophia was quiet. "So," he said, "that's why." She nodded slowly. Then she did something that surprised him. She stepped forward and hugged him quickly, with her arms around as much of his leather jacket as she could reach, which was not very much. He was a massive man. He patted her on the back once, gently. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she said. Marcus got back on the Harley. He was 2 hours behind schedule. Daniel was going to give him a hard time about it. Daniel always gave him a hard time about everything, which was one of the things Marcus loved about his brother. He pulled back onto Route 84 heading west, the wind picking back up, the sky starting to go gold and pink at the edges as the afternoon aged. He thought about Sophia. She wore a yellow hoodie, her hands shook, and she pressed herself against a stranger's back because there was nothing else left to do. He thought about courage. Real courage. Not the movie kind, where someone grabs a gun and saves the day with a cool expression. But the real kind. The terrified, trembling, running through fear kind. The kind that does not feel brave while it is happening, and only looks brave from the outside. She had run. She had hidden. She had held on. And everything had changed because of it. By the time he reached Lubbock and pulled into Daniel's driveway, his phone had 3 missed calls and a text from a number he didn't recognize. He figured it was probably someone from the federal investigation following up. He would call back tomorrow. Daniel met him at the door, moving carefully because of the surgery, holding onto the frame. "You're late," Daniel said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "What happened?" Marcus looked at his younger brother, 10 years younger, softer in the face, always the one who asked too many questions and cared too much and somehow made it look easy. "Long story," Marcus said. "I've got time," Daniel said, stepping aside to let him in. And Marcus sat down at his brother's kitchen table, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he told a story that did not begin with darkness and end with loss. A story that began with a terrified girl in a yellow hoodie and ended with a mother and daughter holding each other in a gas station on Route 84. A story where something good happened, where one person standing still was enough. Gary Hollis was charged with money laundering, conspiracy, and domestic assault. He pleaded guilty to 2 of the 3 counts and was sentenced to 11 years. The undercover federal agent named Deshawn was never compromised. He later said in a debrief that the morning call he made to Gary, the one Sophia overheard, was a mistake, made before the team fully secured their communications. If that conversation had been completed differently, if Sophia had not run and Gary had not been pulled into a gas station confrontation that afternoon, things could have gone very wrong. Linda Reyes moved with Sophia to a small apartment in Abilene. She enrolled in a counseling program. It was challenging. It was slow. It was real. Sophia went back to school. She rejoined the orchestra. She still wanted to be a pediatric nurse. She wrote a letter to Marcus 3 months after the gas station. Officer Walsh, who technically shouldn't have shared it, provided her with his address. The letter was 4 paragraphs long. It talked about school, about her mom, about Biscuit, whom Marcus had mentioned. She said she hoped the half-blind golden retriever was doing well. In the last paragraph, she wrote, "I think about that afternoon a lot. I was so scared I couldn't think straight. I just needed something solid to stand behind. You were solid. I don't know if that makes sense. But thank you for being there. For not driving away. Some people drive away. You didn't." Marcus read the letter twice. He folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of the small table by the front door, where he kept things that mattered. Then he called Daniel. "Hey," he said. "Hey, how are you?" Daniel said. "What's up?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "Just checking in." Daniel paused. "You okay?" Marcus looked at the drawer, thought about a girl in a yellow hoodie, about his sister in Houston, about a stranger in a parking lot 30 years ago, whom no one ever properly thanked. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'm okay." Outside, Biscuit was barking at a butterfly. The highway was open and long and golden in the late afternoon light. And somewhere on Route 84, the wind was still blowing dry and free across the Texas plains, the way it had always blown, the way it always would, indifferent to the small and enormous moments that happened beneath it. The moments where one person chose to stand still, to hold their ground, to say no, she's not going anywhere, and changed everything.